Hello students. So today we will discuss a very interesting concept of this operating system, that is the interrupt, input output interrupt. Okay. So in the operating system last class we have discussed the resident monitor, that is a small program which is residing in computer memory to control the execution of different instructions or to perform a specific task. So today the important topic: input, output, interrupt. Interrupt means what? The topic is input, output, interrupt. So input, output, interrupt. Interrupt means disruptions. Disruptions. This means disruptions. Means one type of disturbance. Okay. While computer is performing input operation and the computer is performing output operation. So while input operation or output operation are being performed by input device or output devices, so this activity, these operations totally controlled by the CPU or processor. So if in between processing, means whenever a main memory is controlling an instruction or input output operations, and in between the input output operation there is some disturbance. Okay, there is some disturbance. This disturbance is nothing but the interrupt or disruption. Okay, this disturbance is called interrupts or disruptions. Okay. So this interrupt means disruptions or disturbances. Whenever a main memory is performing a task and some another interrupts are coming. Okay, we will discuss what are the types of interrupts, how the interrupts are coming. Then for that time period, processor or controller coming from memory to that interrupt, and again completion of that interrupt, then again need to come back to the memory. So the interrupt is one type of disruptions. Okay, this interrupt is one type of disruption. Means whenever we start the input output operation, the CPU loads the appropriate register within the device controller, and the device controller executes the contents of this register to determine what action to be taken. So internally what happens whenever we are performing a specific task, means you are executing some instructions in memory. What happens first? It is stored in appropriate register. Okay, means CPU loads the appropriate register. What happens? CPU loads appropriate registers. CPU loads appropriate registers. Okay, and the register within the device controller, it loads the appropriate registers. These registers are within the device controller. Okay, device controller. These registers are for device controller. the device control. Try to understand. First, CPU loads the appropriate registers, okay, and with the device controller. That may be input device or output device. Then the device controller examines the content of the register. Then device controller checks the content of the register. Checks whatever instructions are stored in register, that will be checked by the device controller. First, CPU loads the appropriate register. The register normally contains the instructions what to do. Then the device controller, whenever input or output operation are performed in the computer system, the corresponding input or output device is required. Means input operations are performed in input device and the output operations are performed by the output device. This input device must have a device controller. And output device also have a device controller. Try to understand. So whenever we are performing input-output operation, the input operations are performed by the input device or output operations are performed by the output device. So input device must have a device controller and the output device must have a device controller. These device controller checks the registers, examine the register where the instructions regarding input or output operations are stored. These registers must be loaded with the CPU to perform a specific task. Okay, to perform a specific task, what to do with the instructions or what to do, what is the important task, what is the job to do. Okay, so in this way, actually CPU performs or processor performs the specific task. For example, if it finds a read request, the controller will start the transfer of data from device to its local buffer. Suppose any instructions that are stored in a register that want to be executed, okay, that will transfer from register to memory, input device controller to memory. So suppose we want to print. So printing is a job that will be instructed from memory, from CPU to printer. Printer is a hardware device or output device. So printer is connected with the printing driver, the corresponding driver. That driver is controlled by the CPU. Okay. So the instructions given to the memory, the instructions stored in the registers which is in memory, that will be, whenever that will be executed, then only the instructions to the device controller can able to communicate. Means the instructions to the device controller of printer must instructed by the CPU, so that printer is able to print the data or print the instruction. Then overall I will tell, unless until the instructions are coming to the printer driver, then printer cannot able to print data. Okay. So in this way, these operations are being done. Okay. So in this way, these operations are being done. So means CPU loading register and again device controller. This is the overall concept of the CPU operation. But what about the input-output interrupt? Suppose a CPU is performing a specific task. Within that time, some internal disturbances from outside may come. Suppose we want to add the pen drive. So in between, beach में disturbance. बीच में आना, इंटरप्ट means बीच में आना, means disruptions. While continuing a process and another process comes, then that is being disturbed. This is the disruptions. That must be controlled by the operating system. Okay, that must be controlled by the operating system. Okay, so that means this is the way. This is the this is the way of controlling input and output activity in which a peripheral or terminal that needs to make receive or a data transfer. Okay. So appropriate program interrupt to be set. Means it sends a signal to the device driver, so that it will be performed. A signal that gets the attention of the CPU and usually generated when input output operation is required. So attention of a CPU for performing a particular input output operation, it requires instruction. It requires the instruction to be executed in the memory or CPU. That means some signal must be that gets the attention of the CPU, so that input output operation can be performed. Input output operation can be possible. So, for example, hardware interrupts. Suppose we are using mouse. We are using a mouse, and in between also I am writing keyboard. So whenever you are using mouse, a keyboard is writing means we are changing. Okay. So hardware interrupt are generated when a key is pressed. Suppose a key is pressed, then hardware interrupt are generated, or when the mouse is moved. Similarly, software interrupt are generated by a program requiring disk input or output. Suppose we are using pen drive, that is also disk input. So we will discuss there are different types of interrupts are there. Okay, now, so this interrupter concept is most important for input operations and output operations also. So these modern operating systems are interrupt driven. All modern operations are interrupt driven. Modern operating systems are interrupt driven. All operating systems has to manage this interrupt input output interruption. Okay, all operating system supports, and also software triggers an interrupt by executing special operations called system call. So there is another concept. These interrupts are also controlled by the system call. That is a very important concept while processing a particular task. That is system call, because system is a computerized this system that manages all the things, that controls, that executes all instructions that is required for input operations or output operation. Or for input operation it requires some input device, and for output operation it requires some output device. So each device is directly connected with the device driver. That device driver, that may be input device driver or output device driver, that must be instructed by the CPU. Are you getting my point or not? That input device driver or output device driver, that must be instructed by the CPU. So CPU controls means there must be operating system. So operating system is performing all these things. So operating system performs all these things, how to execute, what will be the job, how we are getting the output. So system calls is also required. Okay, so event must always you have to give the signal to the CPU, and the interrupter drives nature of operating system, and interrupts are an important part of the operating computer architecture. So we can say that interrupt are the important part of the computer architecture. Okay. This interrupt is an important part important part of computer architecture. Okay, is also important part of computer architecture. So and each computer designs has own interrupt mechanism. Okay, so each computer has its own interrupt mechanism, because interruption may occur or must occur. So to control all interruptions, then only input-output operation can be possible. Okay, the basic interrupt work as following. Like the CPU hardware has a file called interrupt request line. Suppose we want to give some output to print, means to getting output from printer, we have to give some printing contents. Okay, so to process that printing contents, you have to give some input values. Normally what happens? First we are getting input values. Or data. Then it is being processed. Computer is a big processor. Then it provides output. From output device. So input from input device, and the output from output device. While you are performing input-output operation, so input devices are connected to input device controller. Either it may be input or output. These devices are controlled by the device controller. These device controllers are being instructed by the operating system. There must be interaction. Okay. There must be instructed. So instructions to perform any specific operations, operating system is also required. That thing I am telling you. Okay, this is the input-output interrupt. Means some instructions are required. Okay, so when an interrupt occurs, control transfers to the operating system, which determines the action to be taken. So what to do, how to complete the task. For that it requires the interrupt action. So interrupts are prioritized. Suppose we have a lab and having a server, and another computers are connected with that server. Suppose 10 to 15 computers are connected. So at the same time, server wants to print, server machine wants to print, and some other system wants to print. So first priority should be given to the server. This is due to the interruption. Okay, so it has some prioritized. Interrupts are prioritized. Getting my point? Interrupts are prioritized. So these interrupts are prioritized. So means it is performed according to the priority. That is, the higher priority, the faster the interrupt will be sufficient. Priority is there. Priority will be given. There is some priority, it has to consider. Then interrupt are events that temporarily suspend the main program. So these interrupts are temporarily suspend the main program temporarily. It can suspend the main program temporarily. So temporarily it is suspend the main program. This is also and pass the control to the external sources and execute the task, and control returns to the main program. Try to understand. First, it is temporarily suspend the main program. Suppose a program is continuing. The main program is continuing. In between main program execution, so another operations are coming, having high priority. So first it has to suspend this stay, the main program execution. then it will give priority to that particular that operation. After completion of that operation, then again the controller returns back to the main program. Okay, suppose main program is continuing, so in between it will stop, then controller will come to that input output operation, and after completion of task, input output task has been completed, then again come back to the main program that is being left from the rest part of the main program. Okay, so interrupts are an event that temporarily suspend the main program and pass the control to the external sources and execute that the task, and again the control returns to the main program. Okay, so interrupt is a mechanism by which it is modules like input, output, or memory. It is a normal processing of the CPU. Maybe the interrupt may be the normal processing of the CPU, and it is required to improve the processing efficiency of the CPU. Why we are using? Because it improves the processing. You can say it is a normal processing. Okay, it is a normal processing, or it is required to improve the processing efficiency of the CPU. So this interrupt is required to improve the efficiency, processing efficiency of the CPU. So, are you getting a point? So, due to this input-output interrupt concept of the operating system, the processing efficiency is being improved by the CPU. CPU utilization will be better. CPU utilization will be better. Are you getting a point? So, this is the concept of these interrupts. And now we will discuss there are different types of interrupt. Now we discuss the types of interrupts. Types. So basically there are three types of interrupts. One is your external interrupt. Okay. Second one is your internal interrupt and software interrupt. One is your external interrupt, internal interrupt, and software interrupt. So external interrupt arises when it arises due to external call from input-output device. It arises due to external call. It arises due to external call. From input or output device. Okay. For example, input output device is requesting transfer data or power failure, etc. Either data to be transfer or any power failure, any problem, any instruction that will be generated from external device, that is the external interrupt. Means disturbance is due to external device. It arises by the external call. Okay. Then come to internal interrupt. It arises due to illegal or erroneous use of instructions of data. This internal, it arises due to illegal use of instruction on data. Illegal use of instructions or data. Illegal use, that is internal. Any instructions are misutilized, erroneous. Illegal means erroneous. Means there is some error. Erroneous. Okay. Or illegal use of instruction or data. That is the internal interruption. At the internal, first if we external call, this arises due to external call, this arises due to illegal operations, illegal use of instructions of data or erroneous instructions of data. That is the internal interrupt. For example, stack overflow is the another concept. Memory is full. When you are going to store instructions, memory is full. That is stack and overflow. You have understood, and you first year the data structure, we have studied what is stack and overflow. Division by zero, you will learn. Invalidity of code, they are also called as traps. Means trap. This arises due to trap. Something is error, something is in mistake, something is in difficulties. It arises while internally we are getting some traps or difficulties. That will be solved by the that is the internal interrupts. Okay, the difficulties are also solved. This is also controlled by the CPU. But this is one type of disturbance. Actually, this is one type of disruption. So this type of whenever disruptions occur due to external cause, that is the internal interrupt, and whenever disruption due to illegal use of instructions or erroneous use of instructions and data, that is the internal interrupts. So internally some instructions have to be erroneous. Okay, that is the external interrupt. And also some software interrupt are there. It is initiated by executing an instruction. Some instructions, software is set of instructions. Whenever some instructions are being executed and some difficulty may arise, that is the software interruption. Okay, it can be used by the programmer to initiate the interrupt at the desired point in the program. Whenever a programmer is testing or a programmer is performing or executing the software, some instruction may arise, some difficulties, that is the software interrupts. Okay, so this arises due to external call. Internal interrupt arises due to illegal instruction or traps, and software interrupts arises due to some execution of some particular instruction. So external or internal interrupts are initiated from signals. These arises from the signals. That signal occur in the header of the CPU. These signals occur because each signal are coming from input device or output device that must be controlled by the particular header, input or output device. So in the header of the device, whereas software interrupts occurs from the instructions. But whenever the external interrupts occur, external interrupts arises that due to some header device, header part. But whenever the software interrupts occur from the instructions, so the software interrupts are coming from the instructions of particular device. So this is the overall the concept of input and output interrupt. Okay, this is the input output interrupt. Okay, these are the ready for series these interrupts signal, because each device are sending some signals. Each device internally sends some signals to the CPU. Then the CPU understand what that particular device want to do. Then that instructions must be understood by the CPU. Then in between, suppose another instruction is coming and having highest priority, then that process will be stopped. Okay, and the new which is interrupting, which is disrupting, that will be executed. And after completion of this disrupted instruction or that particular instruction, then again comes back to the main program. This is the concept of interruption, input output interruption. Okay, so this is input output interruption. Means it is one type of disturbances whenever a particular instructions are coming from a particular device, that may be input or output, and these input devices are perform the input operation, and output devices perform the output operation, and from all these input or output operations are directly connected with the particular device driver. That device driver must be controlled by the operating system. So in between there are arises some interruptions or disruptions. due to signal passing from that device driver to the memory. And we are having three types of interrupts: external interrupts, internal interrupts, and software interrupts. When a particular instructions are being created, difficulties or disruption, that is the software interrupts. So in this way, we will discuss, we can write the internal interruption and external interruption or software interruption. Okay, so this is a very important concept. Try to understand, try to watch my video, go through all this in detail that I have explained, and I will give the description for this chapter from the group, and you will follow all the things. Okay, if you have any doubt, you can ask me. Okay, now next class we will discuss about the DMA, direct memory access. Till now, we finished today's class, and thank you for watching my video. Okay.